My suit, still cold from the void, clung to me like a second skin. Through the viewport, Titan loomed, an orange orb swathed in a methane haze. Home sweet home, if you could call it that. Captain Miles barked over the comm. "Let's move it, boys, we're burning daylight on company time." Miles was all business, a hard-nosed veteran of a dozen mining expeditions. He ran a tight ship, or rather, a tight rig, seeing as we were on solid ground, miles beneath Titan's crust. His crew was a motley bunch, each with their own reasons for risking their necks on this forsaken rock. There was Dmitri, the geologist, a quiet, intense Russian with a knack for sniffing out valuable deposits. There was Jin, our wiry engineer, a whiz with any machine but prone to bouts of superstition. And there was me, Elias Garcia, the new guy, fresh off the transport from Earth. I was the medic, a glorified babysitter for a bunch of grown men playing in the dirt. We shuffled through the cramped corridors of the rig, the hum of machinery a constant drone. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, a tangle of technology that kept us alive in this hostile environment. Our boots clanged on the metal grating, the only sound that broke the silence. "Garcia!" Miles's voice came through the earpiece, rough and distorted. "Get to the infirmary and check on Murphy. He's been complaining of headaches." "Yes, sir," I replied, quickening my pace. Murphy was our comms officer, a burly Irishman with a booming laugh. He was usually the life of the party, but lately he'd been withdrawn, his usual cheer replaced by a brooding silence. I found him in the infirmary, slumped in a chair, his face pale and clammy. "How's it going, Murphy?" I asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at my touch, his eyes darting around the room. "Not good, Doc," he mumbled. "The headaches are getting worse. It feels like something's crawling around inside my skull." This wasn't the first time I'd heard such complaints from the crew. In the past few weeks, several of the men had reported similar symptoms: headaches, dizziness, nightmares. I'd chalked it up to stress, the toll of working in such a harsh environment. But now I wasn't so sure. As I examined Murphy, I noticed a strange rash on his neck, a series of raised bumps that formed a pattern I couldn't quite decipher. It looked almost like writing. "Have you been anywhere unusual lately?" I asked, tracing the bumps with my finger. Murphy shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "No, Doc, just the usual routes." I frowned, my unease growing. Something wasn't right. There was a mystery brewing beneath Titan's icy surface, a mystery that threatened to consume us all. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" I inquired, my voice tight with worry. Murphy's eyes met mine, desperation in their depths. "No, Doc, I was scared. I didn't know what to make of it. I had a bad feeling about this, a deep-seated dread that chilled me to the bone." I patted Murphy's arm, a feeble attempt at reassurance. "Don't worry, Murphy. We'll figure this out." I left the infirmary, my mind racing. I needed to consult with someone, get a second opinion. But who could I trust? Miles would likely dismiss my concerns as paranoia. Dmitri was too absorbed in his research to care about the crew's health. And Jin was a loose cannon, prone to wild theories and conspiracy. As I walked down the corridor, I spotted Jin tinkering with a piece of equipment in the engineering bay. He was hunched over a workbench, his brow furrowed in concentration. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach him, but I needed answers, and he was the only one who might have them. "Jin," I said. He jumped, startled, a wrench clattering to the floor. "Garcia, you scared the hell out of me!" "Sorry," I muttered sheepishly. "I didn't mean to." "What's up?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for his reaction. "Have you heard about the headaches?" He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, Murphy's been complaining about them too. I just examined him," I continued. "And he has a strange rash on his neck. It looks like writing." Jin's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. "Writing? What kind of writing?" I described the pattern to him. He listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "That's not good," he said, shaking his head. "That's very not good." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I've been doing some research," he said, his voice barely audible. "There are legends, old stories about this moon." "Legends?" I scoffed, my skepticism rising. "What kind of legends?" "Legends about a lost civilization," he whispered, his eyes wide with a strange intensity. "A civilization that lived here long before we arrived. They say they were wiped out by a plague, a disease that drove them mad." "A disease," I repeated. He nodded, his voice filled with dread. "A disease that left marks on their skin, marks that looked like writing." I stared at him, a knot of fear tightening in my gut. Could it be? Could the crew be suffering from the same disease that destroyed this ancient civilization? The thought was terrifying, almost unthinkable. But as I looked into Jin's eyes, I saw a glimmer of truth, a flash of recognition that told me he believed it too. We stood there in silence, the hum of the machinery a reminder of our isolation. We were alone on this rock, at the mercy of forces we didn't understand. "What can we do?" I asked Jin, desperation clinging to my words. Jin's expression hardened, a steely resolve replacing the fear in his eyes. "We need to find out more about this disease, this plague. We need to know what we're up against." He gestured towards a console, its screen glowing with a series of complex diagrams and equations. "I've been analyzing the readings from our geological surveys," he explained, tapping a few keys. "There's an anomaly in the data, a strange energy signature that wasn't there before." The screen flashed, revealing a three-dimensional map of Titan's subsurface. A red dot marked a location deep beneath the crust. "This is where the signature is strongest," Jin said, pointing to the dot. "I think it's the source of the disease." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "You think it's some kind of artifact? Something left behind by this ancient civilization?" Jin nodded. "It's possible, or it could be something else entirely. We won't know until we investigate." A heavy silence descended upon us, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the machinery. We exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us. We knew what we had to do. "We need to tell Miles," I said, my voice resolute. Jin shook his head. "He won't listen. He'll dismiss it as a fairy tale." I sighed, knowing he was right. Miles was a pragmatist, a man of action, not a believer in ancient legends. But we couldn't keep this to ourselves. The fate of the entire crew was at stake. "We have to try," I insisted. "We have to at least warn him." Jin relented with a sigh. "Fine, but we need to be careful. We don't want to cause a panic." We left the engineering bay. As we approached Miles's quarters, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the confrontation. Jin knocked on the door, a sharp metallic rap that pierced the silence. A gruff voice barked from within. "Come in!" We entered the room, finding Miles seated at a desk, his eyes glued to a datapad. He looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "What is it? Can't you see I'm busy?" I cleared my throat. "Captain, we need to talk to you. It's important." Miles leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Make it quick. I don't have all day." I glanced at Jin, a silent plea for him to take the lead. He stepped forward, his voice steady and controlled. "Captain, we've discovered something that could jeopardize the mission. We believe there's a potential hazard in the area we're excavating." Miles's eyes narrowed. "What kind of hazard?" Jin hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We're not entirely sure, sir, but we believe it could be related to the health issues the crew has been experiencing." Miles snorted, a dismissive sound that cut through the tension. "Health issues? You mean headaches and nightmares? That's just the price of doing business on Titan. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." He turned back to his datapad, dismissing us with a wave of his hand. A wave of anger surged through me, but I kept my composure. We couldn't give up so easily. "Captain," I interjected, my voice firm, "I'm a doctor, and I can assure you these symptoms are not normal. They're consistent with a pattern I've seen before, a pattern associated with a rare and deadly disease." Miles paused, his fingers hovering over the datapad. He turned to face us, his eyes cold and calculating. A disease? What kind of disease? I swallowed, my throat dry. A disease that could wipe out this entire crew. Miles's chair creaked as he leaned forward, the tension in the room thickening. Are you saying this is more than just rig fever? That there's something out there, something that could harm us? We believe so, sir, Jin replied, his voice unwavering. The evidence suggests we may have disturbed something ancient and potentially dangerous. A tense silence hung in the air as Miles processed this information. The gears turned behind his eyes, calculating the risks and rewards. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low growl. This is a mining operation, not an archaeological dig. Our job is to extract resources, not uncover ancient relics. With all due respect, Captain, I interjected, this is more than just an archaeological curiosity. We're talking about a potential biohazard, one that could compromise the entire mission. Miles's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his desk. All right, fine. I'll hear you out. But if this is a wild goose chase, you'll both be scrubbing toilets for the rest of the expedition. I exchanged a nervous glance with Jin. We had been given a chance, however slim, to convince Miles of the gravity of the situation. We needed to tread carefully, present our findings in a way that appealed to his practical nature. Jin stepped up to the captain's desk, spreading out a series of diagrams and charts. Captain, as you know, we've been conducting routine scans of the excavation site. Recently, we detected an unusual energy signature emanating from a specific location deep underground. This signature is consistent with patterns observed in ancient ruins on other planets. Miles leaned closer, his eyes scanning the data. So, you're saying there's an ancient structure down there? A tomb, perhaps? It's a possibility, sir, Jin replied cautiously. But we won't know for sure until we investigate further. And you believe this structure is the source of the crew's ailments? Miles inquired, his tone skeptical. It's a strong hypothesis, Captain, I chimed in. Miles remained silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. All right, Garcia. You've convinced me. We'll investigate this anomaly. But I'm warning you, if this turns out to be nothing, you'll both be cleaning latrines until your contracts expire. As we left Miles's quarters, I knew we had no choice but to confront the shadows, uncover the secrets of Titan's past, and pray for survival. Jin and I hastily retreated from Miles's quarters, relief and apprehension swirling within us. We had our orders, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. As we walked, the rig's metallic groans and hisses seemed to amplify. Think he truly believes us? I asked Jin, keeping my voice low. Jin shrugged, his expression unreadable. Hard to say. Miles isn't one for flights of fancy, but he's also not one to ignore a threat to his operation. We made our way to the engineering bay, where Jin began to assemble a team for the expedition. Dmitri, the geologist, was an obvious choice, his expertise invaluable for analyzing any strange formations we might encounter. We also recruited Marcus, a burly driller with a reputation for handling dangerous situations. The final member of our team was a surprise. Murphy, the comms officer, who insisted on joining despite his worsening headaches. I need to see this for myself, he explained, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. I need to know what's causing these nightmares. We suited up in our environment gear, the bulky suits a comforting barrier against Titan's hostile atmosphere. As we descended in the cramped elevator, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The deeper we went, the further we ventured into the unknown. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber illuminated by the harsh glare of our headlamps. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and methane, a noxious cocktail that stung my nostrils. Dmitri immediately set to work, his scanner whirring as he analyzed the rock formations. This is fascinating, he murmured, his eyes glued to the scanner's display. The geological composition here is unprecedented. It's almost as if... He trailed off. As if what? Jin prompted, his voice eager. As if these rocks were Sculpted, Dmitri finally replied, his voice hushed with awe. They bear the markings of intelligent design. We exchanged bewildered glances. Could this be the work of the ancient civilization Jin had spoken of? Were we standing in the ruins of their lost city? Marcus scoffed. Don't get carried away, Dmitri. It's just a bunch of rocks. But Jin held up a hand, silencing him. Let's not jump to conclusions. We need to proceed with caution. We advanced deeper into the chamber, our boots crunching on the uneven ground. We rounded a bend, and a gasp escaped my lips. Before us lay a colossal structure, carved into the heart of the rock. It was a monolith, its surface adorned with carvings and symbols. Fear tightened its grip on me. Incredible, Dmitri breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. This is a monumental discovery. Monumental and potentially deadly, Jin cautioned. Remember the plague. We approached the monolith with trepidation. As we drew closer, the carvings seemed to react to our presence. Suddenly, a piercing shriek erupted from Murphy. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his head in agony. A disquieting light shone from the rash on his neck, the symbols becoming more and more defined. We rushed to his side, but it was too late. His body convulsed, his eyes rolling back in his head. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the seizure ended. He lay still, his skin cold and clammy. Marcus, his face ashen, knelt beside the fallen comms officer, his gloved hands hovering uncertainly. "He's gone!" Marcus croaked, his voice thick with grief. Jin's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the monolith's imposing facade. "We need to get out of here, now!" We hastily retreated, our movements clumsy and panicked. As we stumbled back towards the elevator, the carvings on the monolith seemed to twist and distort, as if mocking our fear. A chilling sensation prickled my skin, the feeling of unseen eyes watching our every move. Back in the rig, the atmosphere was thick with tension. We informed Miles of Murphy's demise, careful to omit any mention of the monolith or the plague. Miles's face hardened, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "An accident?" he questioned, his voice laced with doubt. "What kind of accident?" "A sudden seizure," I stammered, avoiding his gaze. "It could have been anything. Stress, exhaustion, a pre-existing condition." Miles remained unconvinced, but he didn't press the issue further. He ordered Murphy's body to be stored in the freezer and instructed the crew to continue their work. But the mood had shifted. A pall of unease hung over the rig, a sense of impending doom that permeated every corner. Jin and I secluded ourselves in the infirmary, poring over Murphy's medical records and the data we had collected from the monolith. We worked tirelessly, fueled by the need to understand the nature of the threat we faced. "There has to be a connection," Jin muttered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "The rash, the headaches, the seizures, they all point to some kind of neurological disruption. But what's causing it?" I questioned, rubbing my weary eyes. "Is it a virus, a toxin, some kind of radiation?" Jin shook his head. "I don't think it's any of those. The energy signature we detected at the monolith was unique. It's almost as if it were sentient." I finished his sentence. Jin nodded slowly, his eyes wide with fear and fascination. "It's a far-fetched theory, but it's the only one that makes sense. The monolith, the plague, the carvings, they're all connected. They're part of a larger entity, a consciousness that's been dormant for millennia. And now it's awakening," I whispered. "But why? What does it want?" Jin shrugged, his expression grim. "We can only speculate, but if the legends are true, this entity is not benevolent. It's a force of destruction, a bringer of chaos." We fell silent, the weight of our discovery bearing down on us. We had unearthed a Pandora's box, releasing a malevolent power upon the unsuspecting crew. We had to find a way to contain it, to stop it before it consumed us all. The rig's intercom came alive, Miles's voice booming through the speakers. "All hands on deck! We've got a situation!" Jin and I exchanged a worried glance. It seemed our time was up. The darkness was stirring, and we were about to face its full fury. Adrenaline surged through me as Jin and I rushed towards the main control room. Crew members scurried past, their faces showing fear and confusion. Bursting into the control room, we found Miles hunched over a console, his eyes glued to a monitor displaying a chaotic jumble of readings. Dimitri stood beside him, his face pale and drawn. "What's happening?" Jin demanded. Miles turned, his eyes wild with panic. "The drilling site has collapsed. We've lost contact with the excavation team." My heart sank. This was a disaster. The team was trapped underground, at the mercy of whatever lurked in the depths. "We have to mount a rescue," I declared, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. Miles shook his head, his voice grim. "It's too dangerous. The entire area is unstable. We could lose more men." "We can't just abandon them," Jin protested, his voice rising. "They're our comrades." Miles slammed his fist on the console, his eyes blazing. "Don't you think I know that? But I won't risk the lives of the entire crew on a fool's errand." He turned back to the monitor, his attention consumed by the crisis unfolding below. Jin and I exchanged a frustrated glance. We knew Miles was right, but the thought of leaving our friends to die was unbearable. As if sensing our desperation, Dimitri spoke up, his voice quiet but resolute. "There might be another way. The collapse may have opened up new pathways, tunnels that could lead to the excavation site." "You think we could reach them through these tunnels?" I asked. Miles hesitated, weighing the risks. But the thought of losing valuable crew members, not to mention the potential profits from the excavation, seemed to sway him. "All right," he conceded, his voice gruff, "but this is a voluntary mission. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so without repercussions." Jin and I didn't hesitate. We volunteered immediately, our determination fueled by a sense of duty and loyalty to our fallen comrade. Dimitri and Marcus also stepped forward. We assembled a rescue team, gathering supplies and equipment for the perilous journey ahead. As we suited up once more, a heavy silence descended upon the rig. The crew members who had chosen to remain behind watched us with admiration and pity. We descended into the depths, the elevator's descent a slow, agonizing crawl. The elevator doors opened, revealing tunnels, their walls slick with moisture and lined with strange veins. We ventured deeper into the maze, our headlamps casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The silence was broken only by the dripping of water and the occasional groan of shifting rock. As we rounded a corner, we came face to face with a sight that froze the blood in my veins. A massive organism blocked our path, its tentacles reaching out like serpents. Its skin shone, revealing a network of veins and organs. The creature let out a deafening screech, its tentacles lashing out at us. We scattered, our weapons drawn. The air sizzled with energy as we unleashed a barrage of laser fire, but the creature seemed impervious to our attacks. The creature advanced, its tentacles a chaotic dance. Jin reacted with surprising agility, diving to the side as a slimy appendage whizzed past his head. Marcus unleashed another volley of laser fire, but the blasts seemed to have little effect on the creature's rubbery hide. "This thing's tougher than it looks!" Marcus yelled, his voice strained with effort. Dimitri, his eyes wide with terror, fumbled with his scanner, trying to analyze the creature's biology. "It seems to be composed of both organic and inorganic matter." "Great," Jin muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just what we needed. A biomechanical nightmare." I scrambled for cover behind a jutting rock formation, my mind racing. We couldn't defeat this creature with brute force. We needed to find its weakness, exploit its vulnerabilities. As the creature reared back for another attack, I noticed a series of nodes along its underbelly. They glowed with a green light that seemed to throb in time with the creature's movements. "Jin!" I shouted, pointing towards the nodes. "I think those are its weak points." Jin's eyes followed my finger, his expression hardening. "All right, here's the plan. Dimitri, keep analyzing the creature. Marcus, distract it with your firepower. Garcia, you and I will target those nodes." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. We split up, Marcus drawing the creature's attention with a hail of laser fire, while Jin and I crept closer to the nodes. The air surged with energy as Marcus's blasts met the creature's flesh, eliciting a chorus of shrieks and hisses. The beast thrashed wildly, its tentacles flailing in all directions. Seizing the opportunity, Jin and I charged forward, our weapons primed. We took aim at the nodes, firing our lasers in unison. The creature convulsed, its movements becoming erratic. A high-pitched whine filled the air, a sound that grated against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. We continued our assault, our lasers burning into the creature's flesh. The nodes began to darken, their glow diminishing with each hit. The creature's movements slowed, its shrieks becoming weaker. With a final scream, the creature collapsed to the ground, its body twitching. Fatigue crashed over me like a wave, leaving my legs trembling. We had done it. We had defeated the creature. As we approached the fallen beast, its body began to dissolve, melting into a pool of viscous liquid that seeped into the cracks and crevices of the tunnel floor. We had destroyed one manifestation of the plague, but the source of the infection remained. Our comms crackled to life, Miles's voice a harsh intrusion in the silence. "What's your status? Have you found the excavation team?" I exchanged a look with Jin. We had survived one ordeal, but another awaited us. "We encountered an obstacle," I replied, my voice strained. "A creature. We managed to neutralize it, but we haven't located the team yet." A tense silence followed my transmission. Then Miles's voice came over the radio, a hint of frustration in his tone. "Keep searching. We're sending down additional support." We pressed onward, our nerves frayed, every shadow a potential threat. The tunnels twisted and turned, a subterranean maze that seemed to shift and change with each step. As we rounded a bend, a faint glimmer of light caught my eye. We quickened our pace, hope surging through our veins. As we drew closer, the light resolved into a glow emanating from a partially collapsed tunnel. "Could be them," Marcus grunted, his voice a low rumble. We approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. The air was thick with dust, making it difficult to see. We exchanged tense glances. Jin raised his hand, signaling us to halt. He pointed towards a faint outline in the darkness, a human figure slumped against the wall. "It's one of ours," Dmitri whispered. We rushed forward, our relief giving way to alarm as we reached the fallen figure. It was Jackson, one of the drillers. His suit was torn and scorched, his face contorted in a mask of pain. I knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. It was weak, but steady. He was alive, but barely. "We need to get him back to the rig," I declared, my voice urgent. "He needs immediate medical attention." Marcus and Dmitri hoisted Jackson onto their shoulders, their movements slow and deliberate. We turned to leave, but a chilling sensation stopped me in my tracks. I turned back towards the collapsed tunnel, my eyes scanning the darkness. A pair of glowing orbs materialized in the shadows, their gaze fixed on me. "We have to go," Jin hissed, his voice tight with urgency. We retreated, our pace quickening with each step. The tunnel seemed to close in around us, the shadows deepening. We could hear the creature's breath behind us. We stumbled back into the elevator, our bodies battered and bruised, our minds reeling. As the doors slid shut, a final haunting image flashed before my eyes, the glowing orbs of the creature fading into the darkness. Back on the rig, we rushed Jackson to the infirmary. I worked frantically, administering stimulants and patching his wounds, but his condition remained critical. His breathing was shallow. As I tended to his injuries, I noticed a strange pattern on his skin, a series of raised welts that formed a series of intricate symbols. The markings were identical to those found on Murphy. The plague had spread. We were fighting a losing battle. Jin met my gaze, his face grim. "We're not dealing with a simple disease," he said. "It's something more." The infirmary's lights seemed to dim, casting long, ominous shadows that danced on the walls. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. "Quarantine, Jackson," I instructed, my voice shaking. "We need to contain this." But as I spoke, The markings on Jackson's skin began to spread, snaking across his body like dark tendrils. His eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils that glowed. With a cry, Jackson jumped from the bed, his movements unnaturally fast. I stumbled back, barely dodging his grasping hands. He crashed into a medical cabinet, sending vials and syringes shattering across the floor. Chaos erupted. Marcus tackled Jackson to the ground, a struggle ensuing. Dimitri cowered in the corner, his face a mask of terror. Jin rushed to my side, his eyes wide with alarm. "We have to subdue him!" I yelled, fumbling for a sedative, but Jackson was too strong. His strength amplified by the alien infection coursing through his veins. He threw Marcus off with a savage roar, sending him sprawling across the room. Jin lunged forward, a syringe of sedative clutched in his hand. He plunged it into Jackson's neck, but the effect was minimal. Jackson merely snarled, his eyes burning with rage. He lunged at Jin, his hands outstretched. Time seemed to slow down as I watched in horror. In a split-second decision, I hurled myself at Jackson, knocking him off balance. We tumbled to the floor, a tangle of limbs. Jackson's strength was superhuman, his grip like iron. He slammed my head against the floor, sending a blinding pain through my skull. I tasted blood, my vision dimming. But I couldn't give up. I had to protect my friends to stop this nightmare from spreading. With a final surge of adrenaline, I managed to wriggle free from his grasp. I scrambled to my feet. Jackson was rising, his eyes burning. He lunged at me once more, his mouth open in a silent scream. But this time, I was ready. I sidestepped his attack, driving my fist into his gut with all my might. He doubled over, gasping for air. I seized the opportunity, grabbing a heavy medical instrument from a nearby tray. With a cry of rage, I swung it with all my strength, striking Jackson across the head. He collapsed to the floor, his body going limp. The glow in his eyes faded, replaced by a blank, lifeless stare. Silence descended upon the infirmary. We stood there, panting and trembling, the adrenaline slowly draining from our bodies. We had seen the true face of the enemy, and it was far more terrifying than we could have imagined. We knew that the plague was spreading, consuming its victims from within, transforming them into mindless monsters. We had to find a way to sever the connection to this ancient evil, to break the cycle of infection before it was too late. Dimitri, his face ashen, finally emerged from his corner, his eyes wide with horror. Marcus, battered and bruised, helped me to my feet. "What the hell was that?" Marcus rasped, his voice thick with shock. "The plague," Jin replied grimly. "It's evolving." We gathered around Jackson's lifeless form. The markings on his skin had faded, leaving behind only a pale, lifeless husk. "We need to find a cure," I said, "or a weapon." Jin nodded, his eyes narrowed in thought. "We need to go back to the monolith. It's the key to understanding this infection." The thought of returning to that subterranean nightmare filled me with dread, but I knew Jin was right. The answers we sought lay within the heart of the ancient structure. We regrouped, our resolve hardened by the loss of our comrade. We gathered our equipment, our hearts heavy with grief. Miles met us at the elevator, worry creasing his face. "You sure about this?" he asked. "We have no other choice," Jin replied, his voice firm. "We have to end this." We descended once more into the depths, the elevator's descent a gut-wrenching plunge into the abyss. The tunnels seemed even darker now. We reached the chamber where we had encountered the creature. The pool of viscous liquid had vanished, leaving behind only a faint, oily residue. Jin approached the monolith, his scanner whirring as he analyzed its surface. "It's reacting to our presence," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "It's communicating." The carvings on the monolith began to glow, their patterns shifting and morphing into a series of incomprehensible symbols. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the chamber. A voice that was both ancient and alien, yet strangely familiar. "You have disturbed our slumber," the voice rasped, its words dripping with venom. "You have brought the plague upon yourselves." We stood frozen, our minds reeling. The monolith was speaking to us, its words a warning. "We did not seek this," Jin replied, his voice trembling. We came seeking answers, not conflict. Answers? The voice sneered. You seek to understand that which is beyond your comprehension. You are but insects, crawling in the dirt, blind to the true nature of the universe. We are more than that, I retorted, my voice rising in defiance. We are explorers, seekers of knowledge. We will not be deterred by your threats. The voice laughed, a hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. You are fools, it said. You cannot comprehend the power you have unleashed. You will be consumed by the darkness. The monolith's glow intensified, its energy surging towards us. I stumbled back, my knees buckling under me. Jin grabbed my arm, his grip firm. We have to get out of here, he shouted. We turned to flee, but it was too late. The darkness had engulfed us, its tendrils wrapping around our bodies, dragging us into the abyss. Time lost its meaning in the abyss. It stretched and twisted, folding in on itself like a collapsing star. One moment we were falling, the sensation of weightlessness a sickening lullaby. The next, we were standing on solid ground, the weight of gravity a harsh reality. We found ourselves in a bizarre landscape, a nightmarish dreamscape of swirling colors and distorted shapes. Jin and I stumbled through this alien terrain, our suits hissing and groaning under the strain. Marcus and Dimitri were nowhere to be seen, swallowed by the kaleidoscopic chaos. As we wandered, we encountered the remnants of other expeditions, the skeletal remains of miners and explorers, scattered across the landscape like macabre monuments to human ambition. Their suits had long since failed, their bodies withered and desiccated by the harsh environment. Among the wreckage, we found tattered logs and audio recordings, snippets of pleas and final transmissions. They spoke of madness, of a creeping infection that twisted minds and bodies alike. They spoke of the monolith, the source of the plague, the gateway to this infernal dimension. The truth dawned on me then. The monolith was not merely a source of infection, but a conduit, a bridge between worlds. It drew victims into this dimension, trapping them in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. We were doomed to repeat the fate of those who came before us, our bodies and minds slowly succumbing to the plague's insidious influence. The abyss was our tomb, our final resting place. We lost track of time, our senses dulled by the constant bombardment of bizarre stimuli. The markings on our skin spread, twisting and writhing like parasitic vines. Our bodies began to change, mutating into monstrous forms. Jin's limbs lengthened, his fingers transforming into bony spikes. My skin hardened, scales sprouting across my chest and back. We journeyed deeper into the abyss, driven by a burning hatred for the entity that had imprisoned us. We faced countless horrors, battled grotesque creatures born of the plague's twisted imagination. And then, after a seemingly endless wait, we found it. A portal, a rift in the fabric of reality that promised a way out. We leaped into the portal, our fates intertwined with the monolith's sinister machinations. Whether we escaped or merely prolonged our torment, I cannot say. The secrets of the abyss remain hidden, their whispers reverberating through the ages. But one thing is certain. The cycle continues, a never-ending dance of death and rebirth, a haunting reminder of humanity's fragility in the face of the unknown.